welcome to the November version of the Business Swansea Power Hour.
Fantastic, thank you. And as I said, I'm Mary Duckett. My business is EcoBalance Courses, and there's the biog on the website. So today it's about how business practice can lead regenerative economics and sustainable change. And change means change of our behaviour and choices. So this is a slightly participatory workshop as well as a presentation. And to start off, I'm going to invite you both, if you would like to just come present and become aware of your breath, because I'm going to invite you to listen to a story, first of all, by David Brower, the environmentalist. If you want to close your eyes, you can, or just listen, because I know you were not expecting a morning story. Okay, so this is a condensed time frame of the Earth story condensed into 1 year. So imagine January the 1st marks the origin of Earth. By the end of February, the first simple cells appear. All the way through the spring and early summer, simple plants enrich the atmosphere with oxygen. Around mid-August, complex cells emerge and coral appears in the ocean. Beginning in mid-November, just about where we've reached now in this year, the oceans will fill with molecular life forms. In the last few days of November, where we are in 2022, freshwater fish appear and the first vascular plants begin to grow on land. About December the 1st, amphibians venture onto dry land. The great swamps that form today's rich coral beds existed between December the 5th and the 7th. On the 12th, the largest of the Earth's mass extinctions wipes out about 95% of all species. Life bounces back and dinosaurs evolve on December the 13th. Flowering plants come into the scene December the 20th. In another great extinctions, the dinosaurs that we think was such a long time ago disappear shortly before midnight on December the 26th, opening a space for modern mammals to merge on December the 27th. So that's even after Christmas. On the evening of December the 31st, New Year's Eve, about when you might gather with friends for an evening celebration, the first hominoids evolved in East Africa. At 10 minutes to midnight on December the 31st, about when all the New Year's partygoers are really starting to watch the clock, Neanderthals spread throughout Europe. At 1 minute to midnight, agriculture is invented. The Roman Empire fills 5 seconds and collapses at 11:59, 50 seconds, the moment the 10-second countdown begins. At 1 minute to midnight, agriculture is invented. The Roman Empire fills the last 5 seconds and collapses at 11:59, 50. Sorry, that's a repeat. In the last 20 seconds before midnight, we enter the modern industrial era. Those last 2 seconds, we find the explosive growth of the human population, the rise of complex technologies, and what we might call a globalized human culture with 8 billion population. The entire history of the United States fits into the last second of this narrative. The petroleum era of cheap and plentiful energy is crammed into the last half a second. The fireworks start and our dash through Earth's history brings us to the current moment. So thank you for listening to the story. The Earth's history gives us a snapshot of our deep connection with Earth and the context for safeguarding our future generations as our human behaviour has pushed us into the Anthropocene era. The Earth story allows us to show our impact on Earth in a moment of time that impact our decisions and the power of our choices. This is our beautiful planet. It's a photograph quite famous called the Blue Marble. It was taken on December the 7th, 1972 by the crew of the Apollo at a distance of about 45,000 kilometers. That's 28,000 miles. We have pushed our beautiful planet into the Anthropocene era of climate chaos and climate change. So we're just going to take a moment to contemplate the planet and our gratitude for this planet. gratitude is a strengthening practice. It's not dependent on our circumstances. So it's a very helpful practice to help us in this complex time of change when we want to make more sustainable business decisions and strategic sustainable business decisions in complex times. So you can close your eyes for a moment. Think about how listening to Earth's story made you feel. Think about our home, and I invite you to just take a moment to be aware of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 things that you really love about Earth. And I invite you to share those in the chat. Oh, thank you.
I'm happy to share that with you. I'm happy to share that with you verbally if that's the easier way of doing it.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
So it was a little bit the conversation that we had before we became live. It was just about the variety. So the fact that we've got variety in the weather, in the seasons. So one morning completely different to the next. And similarly, sort of the variety in landscapes and the way that nature displays itself. So you've got the coast, you've got the mountains, you've got the deserts, you've got so much variety, and none are similar to each other in any way.
Yes, and that's a really important point about the diversity and variety and how rich and abundant our planet is. And actually that variety is and diversity is a kind of cornerstone on the function of our web of life. And the planetary boundaries here sort of expresses that. It shows that the Earth's weather systems, our environment systems, are a complex system of diverse, interconnected elements, and we in the Anthropocene era are pushing pressure on those planetary boundaries, and that is what actual climate change is. And the planetary boundaries, it shows the complex web of life under kind of categories. So they're listed here as the acidification, ozone layer depletion, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, fresh water available, land conversion, so our impact on huge conversion of uses of land, that impacts then on biodiversity loss, and air pollution, and resilience enabled to purify as well the air. So all these elements to the system are all connected. The planetary boundaries are a concept that presents a set of 9 planetary boundaries, and they were formed through a scientist called Johan Rockström, who led a group of internationally renowned scientists, and this is what they've produced in 2015 and then updated in 2022 to show in the orange areas where we're actually putting pressure, and they're called tipping points on our planetary system, and that's what's creating climate instabilities that are playing out now, and it's through our own human behavior and choices that have put pressure on these. So I'm so, hi Suki, welcome back. So that kind of shows the picture of the complexity, and maybe we could think about what's driving this and share that if we have any idea of what's driving us pushing, you know, I mentioned the land conversion, the biodiversity loss, the biochemical flows, what's pushing all that behavior and causing that stress on our planetary system. If we could think about that and maybe share some of those points in the chat. Or in fact, you could verbalize them, because there's
growth. I think I was one of the things I was going to say is, but unfortunately, it's not, what's the word? It's not balanced, is it? The population growth, the countries where it's being depleted, the population is growing, and other countries where isn't, and that's why the migration is happening now and all this. So it's just that we created a very imbalanced society, I think, as overall. Yeah. So it's affecting everything.
Yes, I agree. And Matt,
I think it's a reluctance to give up the lifestyle that we've become accustomed to as well.
Yeah.
In that, you know, we've got what we have, and all of us are going to have to make sacrifices going forward, and it's probably a little bit of resistance on many of our parts that we don't want to necessarily go there and do that, because it will impact on the lifestyle that we've become accustomed to.
Very much, yeah. I mean, it's like people who were traveling to COP, whatever. I mean, they were just flying in and out, and they hadn't even looked at what the flights were. I know there were time constraints on them because they were our leaders, but they could have done it better. I think that even organizing that, they could have done better to show how it can be done, rather than just they were flying in and out like it was like no tomorrow. And I was thinking, what about all those air miles, things like that? That's all effects, doesn't it?
So, yes, absolutely. Thank you. And all of these behaviors and choices obviously are creating impacts. And this is what's so alarming, because the complexity of the impacts. So we've heard some of the examples of our own behavior, and what is so stressful is the impacts we are experiencing in terms of floods, fires, winds, and then the knock-on impact in poverty, and like Suki said, the inequalities, the lack of balance. So there's climate migrants, there's anxiety around what is happening, there's higher reliance on food banks as systems unravel through these consequences and stresses of the impacts. And what is driving, in a word we could put into a nutshell, is economics, because these are our collective choice and behavior, is our economics. It's human created systems for managing the goods and services. Our economic systems are our collective domestic management. And at the moment, we're not really behaving like guardian or stewardship. It's based on capital gains, debt-based, infinite growth, neoliberal economics. It's largely on the basis of infinite growth, which actually on a finite planet. So there's kind of a learning that we need to go through on wisdom on that, and bring that into our economic system. And so that's how businesses can lead regenerative economics for sustainable solutions, and that's what it will take. The current kind of systems, largely linear capital gains, and those linear systems, as we've been seeing, they increase pressures on the planetary boundaries, like high levels of waste into landfill, high levels of environmental damage and deforestation from overmining. So all the raw materials are extorted. So it's a system of extortion and waste all the way along. And from understanding a little bit about the planetary boundaries, then we really kind of comprehend the impact and the folly of those systems. And it's actually more complex and bigger than the net zero that as you mentioned, Suki, with COP27, you know, that they're the headline key theme, but our responsibilities here in this situation are much more complex than that. So I would like to stop sharing screen at this point, but for fear of a technical difficulty, I will just continue. But just to kind of maybe help us bring our attention back to our breath, back to our body now, because when we're talking about these topics, we can become very cerebral and outside of ourselves. So just bring your attention to your body, sat in the chair, and understand sometimes with these topics, we can become saturated. It's just like being a pint of a jug of water, and we're trying to fit in over a gallon, millions of gallons of water, and we've become saturated, and we're holding all of this, the troubles of the world. Those images that I shared just now are distressing. These issues are distressing, and we can't hold them alone, you know. And when we come together, we create a bigger container. So sharing actually these issues, it's like increasing our vessel and our ability to be able to move and as business leaders make more effective, more innovative, more sustainable strategic decisions by being open to sharing and being part of the space with each other and reconnecting. I think Suki said at the beginning of this meeting, where we're all off on Zoom and we become quite isolated, and part of that can have an impact on our stress levels because of the isolation. So part of our job in this complex world is to find opportunities to reconnect and share our concerns, as we have done, because hearing those actually can help. There's a growing body of behavioural science that shows by giving ourselves opportunity to share honestly can relieve the stress, you know, to allow space. So it's counterintuitive. We think if we verbalise our worries, they're going to overwhelm us, but it actually allows us to hold that space and therefore make responsive decision making, rather than constantly going, oh, it's fine, it's under control, I've you know, everything's sorted, we'll go through COP27, we know exactly what to do, but we'll all fly there by plane because we're so busy, our time is too valuable not to. So that's a business as usual attitude. So maybe we could just take a second to sit comfortably. We're in a safe space, you can look around and just consider something in your life that's impacted by the realities of these climate concerns, maybe what brought you to this particular training, or you know, what's concerning you in your life, in your work or your business that you're particularly concerned about in this context. It can be local or global, and just maybe take a moment to write these down. If you've got a pen and paper, you can write them there, or just write them in the chat. I was going to move on to a breakout room, but maybe just have a few seconds to gather your own thoughts and write your concerns. And rather than going into a breakout, because we're so a small group, we'll just share those verbally. So just take a moment. Okay, so I've managed to stop sharing. Hopefully I haven't created a technical difficulty. So I invite you, Suki, if you'd like to share your concerns.
Ooh,
you can verbally, unless you want to write in the chat, you can verbally.
No, I don't mind saying it. I mean, for me, I think it's going back to, I think, what you said earlier on, that each of us should be playing a part rather than just saying somebody else should do it or whatever. It's like I work part-time at the university and we're signed to the United Nations SDGs. So we are trying to make sure there is a plan for the university and how we deliver that. And we got an action plan that as an institution. But for me, on a personal level, I'm making sure that the paper, I don't use paper, I use electronic, everything I send electronically, and it's all saved. And when the people contact me, and all done electronically, and the paperwork's done electronically. But I know people still print, and they still do that. And then the printed versions are then I think chucked away. So for me, I think my concern is that each of us should have an action plan, how we are going to deliver. I think how we're going to start living better, but also asking, I think, people who are in power to do stuff for us. And I think there should be like a medium of communication, which I don't think exists as much at the moment. There is, if people voice their concerns, I don't think they're actually taken into account. I think that's why we're having these mass marches that you have. There is no planet B, because it's almost like there's people and there's leaders and there's no connection going on. So I think we need to have that connection as well soon rather than later, because time is running out. I mean, you can see it already in Wales, right? I'm sure Matt will have said that. More rain than ever before, Swansea. Thank God I live on a hill, because it's all rained out. But it's, you know, so we have more rain than before, and the rain is like, it's like a monsoon rain. We've never had that before. This year we're having more of it. So I think these are indicators, and then people tell me that's cyclical and cyclical or whatever the word is, doing that. But again, is that correct? I mean, is the
Thank you, Suki.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to give Matt an opportunity for his
think,
concerns.
Yeah,
I'm speaking all the time here, Matt.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I've written down something similar. Really, it's that this is now, there are now visible signs, aren't there, of the change that's happening. And I think for a long time people said it's weather, not climate. But I think that sort of attention is now shifting. Is that there are more winter storms, the summers are hotter and longer. And I think for many people now, there's sort of a dawning, particularly the summer that we've just had, a sort of dawning realization now that this is actually, there's something going on here. And I guess where I've got concerns about it is to what extent people are prepared to make that change, because until it impacts them, to be blunt, I think people are going to be reluctant to make that change. And I think there's probably a realization that this will impact those least able to control it first. So to what extent, you know, decision makers or even us as citizens are going to make that change, and will that change be done in time?
Thank you. And as you've both said, it's a complex situation, and this is why some of this sharing and reconnection is sort of embedded in the training content that I offer, because it's a part, what we have to do is bring ourselves back into the room and operate and function from not only our cerebral intellectual ways of knowing, because that's what's also assisted some of our denial that our impact is such that we are creating pressure and stress on our very planetary systems, and in a rapidly short amount of time also. And because it is complex and we are vulnerable to becoming overwhelmed, it helps us do these dialogues and these share-ins, and to maybe have some understanding that we can't do everything, and that's okay. We can start where we are and work from there, and that is one of our options as 8 billion people grappling with these kind of complex issues with greater and lesser power and influence. So what can give us hope? Václav Havel said, hope is not conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. So the hope is actually starting where we are and doing what we can individually and collectively, understanding our capacities are all very different. But that hope, through that lens, we can see that it's not, it doesn't have to be a done deal. What may seem impossible or improbable can be influenced by our preferences, our hope for what we would like to leave for the future generations to inherit. It is imbued with uncertainty, but our hope allows us to step forward and make our best effort. And in systems thinking, the different factors in the world, in the natural systems and the human systems, our impact on those is given a longer term view. So we can go forward looking at things with a longer term view, and that has a massive impact on our economic systems, because our current economic systems have become shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter term views all the time, extremely reactive. And on those agendas that I described in the other slide previously, you know, the capital gains, etc. So what can give us hope? It's not wanting, there we go. This is an example of regenerative economics. Donut economics was created by Kate Raworth. She's an economist and author. And as with the planetary boundaries that we've seen, so described by, you know, the leading scientists, she's proposing economics that, as well as the quantitative planetary boundaries, which in humans can continue to develop and thrive for generations to come. There's also the boundaries of the safe operating space for our social foundation as well. So where we experience a shortfall in our social foundations, for, you know, food, there's food crisis that we're experiencing, impacting health, you know, the cost of living, there's income and work impacts. So we have social foundation boundaries as well as the overshoot of the ecological, what would be called the ecological ceiling. And within that, it quite clearly shows in the donut economics, there's a safe operating space, and regenerative and distributive economics can be our way forward as business leaders for, you know, making our strategic decisions. So an example of a regenerative economics is looking at circular economy principles in the supply chain, because circular economies, rather than in waste going into landfill, it reduces waste in the chain. There's lower environmental damage, and not only is the entire supply chain in a less impactful cycle, there can be little mini cycles. So at the point of design and production of our material assets, then reducing waste can be designed into that. At the moment, we have a system where things are designed to be obsolete, and that increases the amount of materials that we mine, for example, and then those materials all end up in landfill. Whereas if at the point of design, the responsibility, for example, for recycling those materials was put back on the manufacturers, then we're creating circular economies within circular economies. And it's different, it's entirely different principles of economics, and that's again about shifting our mental and emotional mind and feeling sets about how we engage. What's our motivation in economics itself? Is it orientated by capital gains or orientated by well-being? So there are other examples. Another example in regenerative economics is we do largely an issue with neoliberal economics. Current kind of conventional economics is there's been a lot of deregulation, but we do have some examples of regulation, and we do have ethical and sustainable quality standards. So when you're considering your own supply chains, you can become familiar with other businesses that are meeting and working to these ethical and sustainable quality standards, or it could be a quality standard that you could consider to take on board yourself as a business owner, and kind of when you're making your strategic decisions, because it's reducing the impact of your operations, and it's also something that we know there's increasing consumer demand for more ethical and sustainable business kind of operations. So these are some examples, largely operating around the food, because there's so many regulations around food, but also it's easily accessible to show some of the quality standards that food work to that are more ethical. So and in a whole system, how we impact animals does impact quite often where we're not treating animals very well in big battery farming, then there's a lot of chemical waste products. It impacts waterways. So everything does work in a cycle. So the fishing, how we kind of take fish from the sea, impacts the seabed. So where there's better sea and fishing quality standards, then there is likely to be a better environmental impact in the oceans. So all of these quality standards highlight a different kind of part of that overall complex system. The Soil Association shows organic, and sometimes people might be dismissive of organic, but it reduces chemical offloading into the soil, and in high levels of chemicals is the nitrates and etc. are a massive impact and stress on the planetary boundaries. But our health of our soil is our #1 technology for carbon sequestering, yeah. And if we want to create carbon and look after our carbon sinks, which are our soils, then we will take organic processing, growing much more seriously, because the biolife, the bioflora in our soils is our #1 foremost technology for sinking carbon back into the earth and out of the atmosphere, which is creating all of those problems. So and here also are some ones that are impacting human labour, which are our attitudes and how we treat human labour. Suki mentioned the imbalances and inequalities in the world is actually part of the whole system. And for example, fair trade can be much better, not just for the local economy of those communities, which enable them to make better decisions on how to manage their local environments, but often those companies are treating their workers better. For example, it includes uses of chemicals and the impacts that has on human well-being. So these issues are all sort of connected and interrelated. There's also international quality standards. So those logos were ones that operate in and recognize, we recognize them in imports and in produce produced in the UK. The international quality standards are for the requirements for quality management systems within an organisation, obviously recognised internationally, and organisations need to demonstrate their ability to provide products and services to meet regulatory requirements. So these are lesser known, especially as deregulation. There's a big pressure of deregulation element in neoliberal economics. So when you're making supply chain decisions as business owners, then looking out for some of these quality standards can actually help you inform your choice of maybe where you procure items from. And I wanted to share a little YouTube video, but it will actually be cut out of the overall presentation of this recording. So Suki, I'll share that link with you following, and you can watch it in your own time, because it's a snapshot explaining the international quality standards. I can do the same for the Good Shopping Guide. It's an excellent resource on their website, listing different companies and their ethical and sustainable meditation around animal welfare, human labour and the environment. So the Business Wales Green Growth Framework is a support to develop your own business's environmental policy and to become resource efficient, which means using only the resources, the energy, water, fuel that are necessary. So it can actually help improve the cost-effective running of businesses as well. And if you've got a phone, you can take a snapshot, Suki, of this screen if you would like, or I can share this following the session. But also, as this is being recorded, you'll be able to use this list as a resource, because we'll come on to in a moment an environmental policy statement for a business. But these headings can actually help. You can start to incorporate them in your business plan. You could create an environmental sustainability plan using these topics of working responsibly with suppliers, products and services, appropriate packaging, taking steps to reduce plastics, efficient transport, land use and energy and water wisely, how we source our energy, the attitudes of the utility companies from which we source our energies, how we measure our impacts as well. So these themes can be used within your business plans, or as I said, you could make a sustainability plan in action plan. And this is an example. So the Business Wales Green Growth Framework is really about making a pledge and to function more sustainably with our whole kind of diverse and complex system in mind. And a pledge, one way forward would be by creating an environmental policy statement, because that is a pledge, and it can be promoted on your websites. It can be something that encourages customers to engage with you as customers are becoming more interested in the environmental impact of the businesses that they interact with. So again, this is a slide that you can return to. If you're watching this on the YouTube video, you can pause it here and you can edit and adapt this policy statement to suit your own business. There's a web link there for the environmentalpolicy.org.uk for other materials. There's a lot of legislation around environmental regulations that can include the waste regulations, hazardous waste regulations, environmental protection duty of care, the Environment Act, and Control of Pollution Amendment, and of course the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act that we have here in Wales. So we work in this context, and the environmental policy statement and incorporating those attitudes and aims within your business plan helps you work to all of those to achieve kind of specific goals for your business to function and impact more sustainably. So as mentioned, and as we're aware, it's all very complex. So we'll just take a moment again to have a pause, sit back, think, okay, this is a lot of information, and we just take a little, what's called a mindful breath. We can become aware, even if you're watching the YouTube video, just think, oh, I'm sat here in my seat, I'm watching this video, I'm listening to this talk, and become aware of your attention on your breath and the sensations of your body where you are. And it helps you become present. And when we become present, we can make clearer decisions, less reactive decisions. As we've heard, our economics has become so reactive, we're so short term, but it helps us to allow long-term planning, to slow down, to become present. So we're just going to have 2 minutes now. We'll just take 2 minutes. If you're watching this video, you can pause it and take as long as you like. Write down your thoughts or action points for 3 commitments to work towards for your business. And as we know, with hope, we may not know the outcome for some of the things that we set in motion now, but we can come to a place where we have an idea of the best options, the 3 commitments to work towards where you are, because we're all at different places, where we are, to work towards, to live and operate and function in a more ethical and sustainable way for the benefit of our planetary boundaries, our complex Earth system, and the web of life. Okay, so I'll invite you, if you'd like to share you don't need to share all of them, or you can share all of them, just 1 or 2 of your commitments. Suki, would you like to go first?
Okay, I was going to ask Matt to go first because I've been barging in. So Matt first, if you don't mind.
Happy to do that. Yeah, that's fine. I guess it's slightly different for us because we are acting as local government, a local authority. But of course, that doesn't preclude us from playing our part. So one of the things that I've written down, and it's a 2-for-1 really, is making sure that we are acting as leaders and leading by example, because we can't and shouldn't be encouraging businesses to behave in a certain way if we as the local authority, the local council, are not doing the same. So certainly there's something around us acting as leaders, leading by example, and encouraging businesses through example in terms of what we're doing. And I think that sort of linked to that, but not directly the same point, is making sure that in every opportunity, in every piece of work that we do, we're looking for opportunities to encourage businesses to behave more environmentally sustainable. So, for example, we're about to launch a new set of grant schemes in the new year. And is there an opportunity that encouraging businesses to apply for that grant funding? In doing so, we encourage them to sign up for the climate pledge, for example. So it's small little wins that I think that we can be doing through everyday work that we're carrying out anyway, but looking at that as a driver for changing and influencing behaviour amongst local businesses. And then the final thing is really in terms of our programme going forward, thinking about and trying to weigh up the social versus environmental benefits of everything that we're doing. So we spoke about, you know, the balance between doing these workshops in line and on person, and there are environmental benefits to doing it on Teams, but there are social benefits to doing it in person. So I think we need to be aware of both of those things and just consciously weigh up when we're going forward, how do those two things sit together, and what is the wider benefits in terms of each of those sort of two things that we need to weigh up.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Suki?
Well, for me, I mean, I always looked at when I set up my company that I'll remain carbon neutral as much as possible. But that was easy because I started trading in COVID times and I wasn't traveling much. But what I do now is if I'm traveling, I try to see 3 or 4 clients in one city where I am. So try to organize it that way. So I am mindful of the fact that I am traveling by car or train as much as possible. But sometimes that's not possible because if you're meeting somebody outside, it's not possible. So I'm trying to remain doing that. And the second one is I use a lot of electricity. So I have actually gone and sourced now electricity from a company that is environmentally creating through solar panel and wind panel. So I've done that recently in the process of changing. So I'll do that. And the other one is I think I'm going to add something on my website, I think, to say that this is what I'm planning to do as, and I think we should all be doing a part. I think it's going back to what Matt said, I think. If you're living it, we should be showing that we're living it, and it is possible to live a good life, a quality life, by not actually compromising your ethics or your, even your comfort. So I think that's going to be important, I think, for me.
Thank you. Thank you both. And that brings to a close. So, diolch yn fawr. I have a couple of discounts available, so I'll share those codes. One's for the Ethical Superstore and one's for the Good Shopping Guide, Suki. So I'll share those once the recording finishes.
Fantastic.
I think that's all. My presentation is complete now.
Thank
you very much. Thank you for taking part so thoroughly, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Great. I don't know if you've got any questions, Suki. I've certainly got one in terms of you mentioned about the sourcing sustainably, and then there was the series of logos that you put on there, the fair trade, that there were various other ones. There's a perception, and you'll tell me whether this is right or wrong, that sourcing ethically, environmentally is the more expensive option. And certainly given the financial challenge that we're all facing at the moment, people are perhaps less likely to be able to be in a position to make those choices. So firstly, I guess, is that perception that sourcing sustainably, is that a correct perception? And whether it's right or wrong, what can we do to sort of change that perception for the better, for worse? So what's sort of your view on that, Mary, in terms of where we are?
Yes, thank you. of course, it's complex. In some instances, the more ethical, sustainable option might be more expensive, and depending on our own resources available and our decisions. And this is again where I say it's not just functioning on our cerebral, but bringing other ways of knowing, our heart knowing, our emotions, to how we make those decisions. Because if it's pence, is it a best value? Also, if we don't need the item, is it a good investment? We have so many material things where we live in our culture and in this country. We have so many things as consumers. Do we need that item? Could we save money on that item and invest in something that's more sustainable? When looking at banking, I haven't mentioned banking and the governance of corporations, but banks are private companies. And sometimes, I mean, how we invest and the financial products that we engage with, sometimes the more ethical version might be a % different on the interest, and that will impact on a monthly expenditure. But is that a saving? You know, rather, maybe it's actually an investment, paying that tiny little bit more. And we are in a cost of living, so we need to honour and acknowledge that everybody is impacted by the cost of living crisis to greater and lesser degrees. Some people remain in a relative comfort, and this is where we can support ourselves to not panic by becoming more fearful and greedy, you know, because that's one of the emotional drivers that are underpinning the complexity of the picture that we're looking at now. And that is why I bring some of these edges into the training, because we can't kind of just go, it's got to be best value, because sometimes that's a reactive thing that's put from a point of fear as well, even though we don't acknowledge that driver for why we're so obsessed with best value and what we see as that. Because if our measures are orientated around well-being, then the best value is something that's not exploiting another human being by not paying them properly in another part of the world. So it's extremely complex situation, Matt. So it's an incredibly wonderful question, but we are trained into wanting a silver bullet. We're not going to have a silver bullet. You know, what we can have is supporting ourselves to operate through our sensitivities to make better conscious choices as consumers, because our impact has accelerated. It's been, we've heard from the story at the start of this presentation, over such an extraordinarily short amount of time, 200 years, in billions of years of Earth's history, we're putting these stresses onto the climate. And the only thing it's impacting is the safe operating space for ours and other species. Yeah, because of the bio and species diversity loss. So that as we invest in ethical and sustainable options, then they become more affordable. As we work with, Matt, you mentioned authorities, as our local authorities and strategic decision-making arenas move into penalising rather than subsidising, financially penalising non-sustainable operations rather than financially subsidising through deregulation non-sustainable corporations and operations, then the ethical and sustainable choices will become more in reach for the general populations, because it's a whole system. We all have a responsibility in that. And so to say, oh, I can't afford it, might be barrier on one consumer decision, but it might not be the barrier for every consumer decision. So I encourage us to stay open to any change that we can make, any conscious change we can make and celebrate that and support each other to do that. It isn't easy. We've got a lot on our plate, but we can share that, and it's okay.
Thanks, Mary. I realised it wasn't a straightforward question as I was asking it.
Perfect.
I think the other thing as well is sort of is seeking out the opportunities that the cost of living crisis in itself might deliver. So most of us are now thinking about, you know, turning down our heating by half a degree, having it on less often, the cost of petrol being a driver to do less journeys. So if when we sort of do return to slightly, I don't know, less financially challenging times in 2-3 years' time, how can we carry those behaviours forward so that, you know, the choices that we're making now are carried forward? Just a thought.
Thank you. Absolutely spot on there.
Yeah. Suki, anything further from you?
Yeah. That question you asked, I thought it was quite appropriate, because that touched on practically what Mary was talking about, having that supply chain in regenerative. Because when you actually look at it, our fridge freezers, they're only made to last for 6 or 7 years, and then you can't recycle them. You've got literally that thing is being thrown away, and then you've got a new one coming in. So I think you touched on it. And also, like heating now, people complained, but we are lucky in that sense. We got mild winters at the moment. And I think people they walk around in shorts and they complain they're cold. That, you know what I mean? And they put the heating up rather than putting an extra layer on and reducing the heating and things like that. I think we do need to be mindful of that. So your question was perfect, actually. You asked my question and answered Mary's questions as well. It was perfect. Yeah.
Thank you both. So that's our power hour.
Enjoyed it. Loved it. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, we've covered a huge amount of ground, and
yes,
you've done fantastic to cover that amount in the hour that we've had. Thank you, Mary, for again taking us through the session, and I'll close it there. So thank you very much.